Welcome to this edition of the Don Dev podcast. Today we will be talking about deciding what games to make. I'm your host, Chad Spangler, joined by our lead developer, John Grady. Just the two of us today. And first off, I'd just like to talk in general. What games are you interested in making with the studio?
I have a dream game. I don't want to talk about the dream game right now, but,
I think we all have our dream games.
long term, there's the game that I will have to make.
So, like, in general, like, what genres? Like, just very vague,
In general, I have a real leaning for kind of strategy and RPG stuff. There are certain types of action games. I like Metroidvanias and space shooters and stuff, but I grew up in a time where, when I was 6 years old, I'd stay up late at night watching my big brother play Warcraft 2 and Daggerfall.
Yeah.
And, that sticks with you, when you're a little kid and there's a Nintendo and Shadowgate is one of the things on there. That kind of stuff is kind of my formative game memories. And so that's just the kind of stuff I like to make. I also have to give a shout out to Mega Man, of course, because what would life have been in the 90s without Mega Man?
Right. As far as I'm concerned, more of a long-term goal for a game to make. I definitely want to make some sort of RPG, a unique one. I don't want to make one that just kind of blends in with the crowds of other RPGs, either classic or modern. I want to do something that stands out, and I've actually, it's been kind of a running joke that I've been saying a very specific kind of RPG to the team. Every time someone's like, "Oh, what should we do here?" I'm like, "You know what would solve this? This specific game." And they're like, "Oh, Chad, stop it." So I want to make an RPG, but kind of outside of genre, more of I want to make something funny. This works for me because I feel like that plays to my talents as far as voicing and writing, but also it's as a marketing person, that's something I can sell. And that's something that's pretty important to me is, being able to sell something we make,
Yeah, there are definitely a few ideas we've had that lean on the comedy side of things. And when I say comedy, I always like to try and think of things in terms of either that Jack and Daxter style comedy, or a almost parody funny I like to think of it. There's a game that just recently came out called Space Tyrant that kind of makes fun of the big evil bad guy who runs the galaxy, and I like that kind of humor too a lot.
Yeah, I dig that. Something I just kind of thought of, and this kind of plays into what we'd be able to make at this point, or in the future. Would you ever want to make an unabashedly adult rated game, no censorship whatsoever? Because I know we definitely have the senses of humor for it, but do you think we would ever make that to where we know from the onset that we'd be pretty much abandoning a younger audience? Probably making a lot of people quite angry. Is that ever something you think we would be interested in doing in the future?
I really don't know. I mean, part of that is our primary business partner is Steam, and they have a really unclear line on where the line is on that kind of stuff. And so if to consider that, I would have to say first, more than anything, I would have to see a more consistent stance from them on what is and isn't acceptable in that regards. Because right now it seems a little arbitrary.
Right. Not exactly. Because
it kind of seems the bigger your name is, the more you can get away with.
Yeah, it's also unclear in the sense that people it's not exactly clear what gamers are getting into, because I've seen several things. Sometimes I've heard of a popular game, I know nothing about what it's about, and I'll have to Google if it's adult or if it's a kid game or whatever, because oftentimes it's not clear either from the screenshots or trailer or from even the Steam rating. Like there's no, like, I can't tell. Like and I've seen other people like have to Google, is this game okay for my kids? I can't really tell. Like so it's a bit interesting. Like I haven't actually researched this too much. Do they go by the ESRB in any way?
I mean,
Like I know they have games that are rated by the ESRB, but is that a factor for them?
I believe there's a way you can put the ESRB rating on there,
Mm-hmm.
but it's by no means mandatory. This is both a benefit and a detriment of the way the ESRB system got set up. Is in the early 90s, the industry decided to implement this voluntary self-regulation system that is the ESRB. Basically because they were concerned that Congress was going to slap them with something much more restrictive if they didn't do something.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I can tell, I mean, we didn't have to get our game ESRB rated to get it onto Steam.
Right.
So it's not something you have to do. And there are maturity filters on Steam. You can say, hey, my game is mature or not, and stuff like that. But I feel like it is probably something that needs some measure of standardization in the industry that we've lost since digital distribution kind of became a thing.
Yeah.
When we were kids and we were playing on consoles and we were buying box PC games in the store, ESRB was there. And since the retail boxes have gone away largely, if you're not on the console, ESRB is not as much a factor.
Right. And maybe Steam will change some stuff with that in the future to kind of discourage or encourage us from making an adult game in the future that is unapologetically an adult game. Because I feel like there's going to be a little hidden adult humor in almost anything we make that has, writing in it. But, neither here nor there. But another thing I want to talk about as far as, the main topic of what to make, profitability and market. There's a lot of games that we want to make that other members, inside of our head, we're like, oh, I want to sit down and make this. Like, this is my passion project. But like other people in our group, and I've been kind of a nagger about this, like just, nagging people about, but hey, can we actually make money off of this? And as a business, that's something you have to keep in mind. Like, as much as you want to just make every passion project, that you think of, it's a matter of, is this going to do anything for the company? And I think that's a big concern, because there's a couple of games that have been pitched around that I'm like, man, that's going to be a tough sell for me as the marketing guy. Like, I'm not sure if the market's there.
Well,
so like,
yeah, and not just is a game something you can sell, but can you sell it? We're kind of talking about our second game in generalities, because it's not announced yet, but like
right.
our second game definitely has certain platforms that it's more viable on, and we're not probably going to be able to launch on those platforms when the game first releases. More than that, it's probably not a game that's particularly Twitch friendly.
Right.
So it's one of those things that just because a game is good and maybe would have a player base, you have to consider all those things. I know, I hadn't thought as much about, is the game Twitch friendly, until I saw Total Biscuit recently do coverage on a change made to Invisigun Heroes to make it more streamable.
I watched that video and it was fantastic. That was so great.
So yeah, it's one of those things that you have to consider, because you do want to make your passion project game someday, and you can't do that if you're starving for equipment or starving. We're lucky enough to all have day jobs and not to just be completely financially ruined if the company doesn't have a success, but it still is a factor in terms of equipment and software licensing and things like that.
Right, absolutely.
I need to, and people's motivation.
Reminds me, I need to send an email. But yeah, and that you kind of touched on this, but this is another topic I'd written down to move on to: shareability and visibility. There's where I feel like my experience so far, and I'll touch on this in the blog series that I'm currently working on, is we've had a lot more luck with getting our name out there and marketing and, finding people to play our game with YouTubers and Twitch streamers than any, like, by far any other form of, like, kind of traditional games media of just, someone writing an article. We've had a few articles here and there, but, we've had so much more luck with contacting streamers and YouTubers. So that becomes a big factor in making a game that you want to be profitable is you have to make something that people can share, and that people enjoy watching other people play. And that's you can there's a lot of great game ideas out there that aren't necessarily fun to watch, and Total Biscuit, what was the name of that game that Total Biscuit was talking about again?
Invisigun Heroes.
Invisigun Heroes. Like they had a literal visibility problem, not like of their game being out in the world, but people couldn't see. The whole concept of you're only visible when you're shooting. That was kind of the purpose of the game. So watching it, nobody knew what the hell was going on. Like, so they made some changes, like, spectator mode and all that, which is great. But, not every game is going to have solutions like that, like puzzle games, for instance. Like puzzle games are very, they can be pretty prolific on the app stores. Like you can find puzzle games that sell great, but they're not necessarily ones that you're going to go to a streamer and watch, and with streamers and YouTubers being such a huge factor, how, that's something we're going to definitely have to learn is how do you get something like a puzzle game out there,
Yeah, and I think you have to use the marketing, I think, that works best for your product.
Mm-hmm. It's tricky, right?
It's one of those things. I think that's part of why so many puzzle games, for example, throw in social media sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Is it gives a little more visibility of, hey, can you beat my high score or this or that? And it's you really need a different strategy depending on what you're making. I mean,
right.
For example, you do not market a DLC the same way you do a normal game.
Right.
War of the Chosen for XCOM 2 just came out, and I noticed a couple key things. First, just the level of in-depth, like crunchy, numbery system discussions that they did as coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Their coverage was clearly for people who've like played the base game a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, I mean, I could not go a day for 2 weeks. I could not go a day without seeing an ad show up on my Facebook feed or, a bunch of new stuff off of Twitter, or, one of the 4 or 5 big YouTubers who just basically were given the game and said, hey, don't show any cutscenes, but other than that, do playthroughs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was able to, a week before it came out, watch, pretty much half of a full playthrough of, a 100-hour game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely something that works a lot better for DLC, where you've got people committed versus a base game where nobody's heard of it. And, how do you get that excitement out there?
Right. That's very, very different between genres, right? Who knows? Maybe, and I'm sure we'll talk to a lot of people depending on what the genre of our next game is. But who knows? Maybe for our next game, it won't be Twitch and YouTubers who are our big boon in visibility and sales. Maybe it will be more of a traditional, games review media. Maybe it'll be something we're not even thinking about right now.
Yeah.
Another factor that I kind of want to talk about is longevity, because we made Intrusion Protocol, and I feel like it does have that retro style feel. It doesn't really age at all. Like you have first person shooters and such right? That they come out with a new one every year that looks better and better and better, and suddenly the old one's like, well, why bother with this? Like, it looks like crap now. But, you know, when you make a retro game, you're specifically making a game that looks like it already has age to it. And, you know, I think that's something we didn't really think about initially, but I think has quite a bit of value in that it, you know, it doesn't get old because we made it to kind of already be old, right? Like,
Yeah, I will say I do have some mild concerns about that art strategy.
Mhm.
It's what I call the Nintendo effect. Since pretty much since the original Wii came out, but definitely with the Wii U, they have figured out a way to stylize their art that is very timeless.
Mhm.
And I always I really love pixel art because I thought pixel art was timeless, and it is.
Mhm.
But I mean, like Yoshi's Woolly World is probably equally as timeless and looks better. And I do have some mild concern that we've got this kind of strategy of mostly pixel art because that's what our team is used to and familiar with.
Right.
But I do have some mild concern of people picking up these more timeless strategies, these more stylized, less photorealistic strategies, and that leaving us kind of behind visually,
Right.
um, where they have the same benefit we do, but a few more benefits as well.
Right. And you know, I'm not a fan of like I enjoy games that have like are going for like this looks like real life. I photorealistic. I like games like that, but I personally at this point in time have no interest in actually making one because you're automatically when you're going for that, you're automatically going for a standard that has been reached for and is unachieved. You're comparing your game to real life, looking like real life, and that's a standard that, especially with a low budget, you're just not going to be able to achieve. Like if these multi-million-dollar AAA companies can't make something look really, really real, which it's getting pretty close. I'm pretty impressed with some stuff, but that stuff is in a few years probably going to look like crap. Like it's
I will distinctly remember in high school, pulling a
Mhm.
copy of Game Informer out and putting it on the table and just being like, look at this. Look
Right.
at this Oblivion cheese wheel and how real it looks. You
Yeah.
go look at an Oblivion cheese wheel today and like it is comically bad.
Dude, I did the same thing with Grand Theft Auto Vice City. I played the crap out of Vice City. It's like my favorite Grand Theft Auto game. I don't know, 5 is pretty dope, but Vice City, I played so much, and at the time I was like, this is the pinnacle of what video games are ever going to look like. How can they possibly make it look any better? And I went back to it when I downloaded it on Steam, on a Steam sale. I'm like, oh, sweet, I'll play a little bit of Vice City, and I'm like, wow, this looked this bad. Like, I thought this was the best looking game ever. Like it's and as good as we think that these photorealistic games look right now, they're for the most part some are not gonna look that way in a few years.
Probably my favorite game of all time is
Hmm.
Legend of Dragoon.
Hmm.
I cannot go back and play it. I just can't.
Yeah.
It is that visually painful. Um, but I go back and I play Super Metroid once a year.
Right.
I go play Mega Man X all the time, and so there is really that kind of difference between stuff that ages well and doesn't for sure.
Right. I wanna. You might know a little bit. I've only played. I'll admit and revoke my nerd card if you must. I have only played one Final Fantasy game in my life. To extensively. I've played a couple here and there, but extensively, I've only played Final Fantasy X, and I think that art, even though it's kind of sort of photorealistic, has aged exceptionally well. I'll still look at that game and be like, "Wow, this looks amazing," and this game is
It's
old.
because it is a little stylized.
Yeah.
It's where they were kind of starting to figure out that to get more visual oomph out of those systems, they had to try some different techniques with them.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, no, it's Ten's a really weird Final Fantasy game. It's my favorite, but it's also a lot of people have mixed feelings on it.
Yeah, I know. I loved it. So I think it's safe to say that we're not really looking to, at least not for a long time, to be in the game of making any sort of photorealistic games. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, if anything, I mean, I would be open to making, some kind of Woolly World style cartoony 3D game.
Mm-hmm.
But before we could get there, we would have to have the revenue for more software, and we'd probably have to hire a 3D artist. And there's a lot of
Right.
stuff that just currently the team doesn't have the capability to do. And when it was just me in my bedroom and I was thinking about, well, what kind of games am I going to make? I did kind of have this idea of, well, let's just make Super Nintendo games. I mean,
Yeah.
it's of all the games I've replayed in my life repeatedly, and not really with nostalgia glasses. Like I said, Legend of Dragoon is my favorite, and I cannot go back and play it.
Yeah.
It's always the Super Nintendo games. They just look good even today.
Yeah. And that's this kind of, you kind of touched on it, but this goes to, resources. As much as you want to make certain games, you have to keep your resources in mind, and we don't currently we don't I get this question every once in a while, like, oh, do you plan on making 3D games? And currently the answer is no, because we really love Game Maker Studio 2, which shines with 2D, can do 3D, and they'll probably make improvements to the 3D, but really shines with 2D. It's safe to say that art is one of our bottlenecks, and going from 2D to 3D as far as art goes is just there's no way. We don't have the capability to do that right now. That's this is far. We like you said, we would have to specifically hire someone else to do 3D art, and that's not cheap. But is there any sort of game that you would want to make, or any sort of thing you would want to do with a game that is currently limited due to our resources, like in general?
Well, I mean, obviously the music situation is frustrating, to say the least. And having to work in a situation where our music guy gets one go at it, and once the power's off to that system, he can't go back and edit things, is limiting, to say the least.
Yeah,
for sure. I know he's lost some stuff that he really wanted to do more with. So there's that. But on the other sides of it, I mean, yeah, our art guy needs some more experience just making more sprites of different kinds. We definitely need more experience with animation, motion animation of stuff that's, actually moving around and changing perspective and things like that a little bit. And from a engineering standpoint, I try not to let us endeavor on projects that I can't reasonably just be like, okay, yeah, I know how to make about 75% of that game right now before we've done pre-production. And so that's kind of one of those things with like a bigger project, like an RPG, where I'm confident we can make an RPG right now, like a big full RPG.
right.
I'm not confident that we can't do that without me throwing away a year worth of prototypes.
Exactly. Like it's you kind of, when you're a new company, you really have to, even if there's a game you really want to make that has this big scope, you really have to ramp up to it. You can't just, it's not a sustainable business model to just, literally only program a game for a year or two before you, are able to even show the tiniest thing, And I think that's what a lot of people I've seen and read about. They start way too ambitious. They have this big idea, and I've seen this, like, I've seen a couple of game jam games from various game jams where they'll be like, oh, we basically made a physics engine, and they'll you'll see the game and it looks awful, and like you're just like, Man, that's I don't think that's the purpose of a game jam. Like you just kind of reinvented the wheel without putting the wheel on a car, you know? Like it's yeah, I feel like when you're starting out, when you're, working on your very first games, you it sucks if you have a passion projects that you really want to do that does have a large scope, but it's just not feasible to do it right off the bat. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we can mention for a minute here that for a month Intrusion Protocol was, hey, I'd like to play Mega Man, and there haven't been any Mega Man games in a while.
Mm-hmm.
So let's make something like that. And we had to pull off of that because our art guy wasn't up to that level yet. He couldn't, quite get the character art and the character animations there to do that on our first go through. So we had to pull back, let him get more familiar with the tools, and just make some basic stuff in a simpler game.
Mm-hmm. And something I want to mention. This is something that Tim Ruswick from Game Dev Underground has mentioned in several of his episodes. Great YouTube channel. He should have way more subscribers than he does. But when he's talking about what games you should make, he's like, this is how you get inspired. A thing you can do is take two games you like the main concepts of two games you like, and just mash them together. And he says, like, well, isn't that just copying those games? And he's like, look, we're all inspired in one way or another by other games. We're gamers. That's unavoidable. And those games that you're quote unquote copying, which you aren't really copying, are inspired from yet other games. Like it's okay to take general concepts from other games or ideas from other games and work with those. Like, obviously, don't make a ripoff. Don't make the exact same thing as that game. That's really scummy. But, work off of, the ideas of others, because that's just inspiration, right? And sometimes there can be a fine line between inspiration and copying, right? Like, I've seen games that, they seem to take inspiration from a certain game, but it almost seemed like you can kind of get in their head as far as development goes, that they got started on making this game, they had like a fresh idea, and then it just like took inspiration from this other game and took more inspiration from this other game and more, and it just kind of became that game except worse. Like have you ever experienced anything like that or seen any games like that?
Well, yeah, I would say it's okay to you know be the kind of person who likes, Star Wars and Gundam, and you played like R Type or Asteroids or something when you were a kid, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna make my own like space game. Like, there are other games in that genre, and I'm gonna make a game, and that's fine, and that's reasonable. It's probably not as okay to be, the 57th block-based survival game that doesn't do anything different.
Right.
Um, that would be kind of how I would look at that. I mean, and this is we're talking people who are actually trying to make a real game here, not we can talk all day about the asset flippers and their ilk.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, just in general, you have to. I would say there's a big difference between, genre and IP. A big difference between genre and a universe. You could make Metroidvanias all day long, and they could all be different. They could all be. I mean, there's a reason why it's Metroidvania and not Metroid or Castlevania.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is in space, and one of them is in castles fighting vampires. But I mean, they're very similar.
Yeah.
Underneath that coat of story paint, as it were.
Yeah. And I see this kind of thing a lot with specifically puzzle games, like on the app stores or whatever. And sometimes it's hard to tell if a game is like, legitimately its own, or if it is just a blatant ripoff. Like, I personally think Candy Crush Saga, like I played Candy Crush Saga once just because I'm like, let's see what this is. Like, millions of people play this, whatever, and I'm like, oh, it's Bejeweled. Like, that's That's it. Like there's nothing else here. It's Bejeweled that costs a lot more if you want to pay to win. And I'm
Well,
like,
I can't give too much commentary on that just because I've generally avoided Facebook games like the plague because I there's a lot of really bad actors on that scene
mhm,
with a lot of really psychologically exploitative tactics that they use. And I prefer not to sort through that ilk to find one or two decent games.
right,
A similar problem to what I think we're looking at with Steam Direct at the moment, where they still haven't quite figured out how to get these bad actors who are doing asset flips and have weird cottage industry ways of making money from flooding the store. And so, I do have some concern, making these small kind of pixel arty indie games, looking at it is, how many people are starting to take the approach with indie Steam games that I take with Facebook games, where it's like, I don't want to have to figure out what's a real game and what's, a scam, basically.
right. And it's also a huge problem with mobile games because oh my god, like the ocean of mobile games that are pure asset flips or pure like it boggled my mind. Like going back to Candy Crush, it because I did it on mobile. I didn't even play it as a Facebook game. I did it on mobile, and it just boggled my mind. I'm like, how could they even make this? Like, it's like, do people not are is the market now just too young to remember that Bejeweled existed? Like, did they buy Bejeweled and just reskin it a little bit? Like, I don't and that's to like hardcore gamers, it's Candy Crush is a joke, right? A joke game. But to, millions and millions of people that play it, like it is a legitimate game to them. And I'm like, man, how did they get to this point? And like
I think it depends a little bit. I mean, when you talk about Bejeweled, it is not Bejeweled, Candy Crush.
Mhm.
My understanding is it is a functional game.
It is.
It is similar to Bejeweled, but I think the key difference is they, as it were, beat Bejeweled to profitability and marketability on the mobile market. They figured out how to take all the psychological tricks that make a game really compelling to come back to and you know put that on a form where all these people who had played Bejeweled, as a CD-ROM game back in the 90s, your mom and your kindergarten teacher and all these people, and put it in a form where they could easily access it, download it for free, play it, and it was shinier with a lot more like stuff going on to
Yeah.
make it more appealing. And I
And
mean,
pu-
I think that's kind of, I don't want to get too much into talking about King and their practices and all that.
mhm.
Um, but at the same time, that
And
ultimately you can't, you can't trademark a gameplay idea.
right.
You may be able to patent it, but core mechanics, for better or for worse. I think probably for better, because I think otherwise we would live in a horrifying world of just every game that comes out gets the pantsuit off of it.
Right.
Are relatively hard to protect.
Mhm.
And whatever opinions people may or may not have about King, at least they did release an original product in terms of all their assets and all their code base and all this and that.
Yeah.
Compared to the plethora of mobile games that rip off Pokemon sprites or Mario sprites or
Right.
music. I mean, that's like it's easy to go after the big guy in the room and say, well, we don't really like that they kind of used an idea that was already out there, and we have some argument with their practices or this or that. But whatever people's opinions may be on them, they're far better actors than the people who are literally just stealing stuff and putting it out there.
Right. And in a weird way, as much as I do not like Candy Crush Saga and King for a lot of reasons, I'm in some ways I'm very impressed because they found a way to take a game like Bejeweled or whatever and make it insanely replayable because they give you a path
like you don't know why exactly you want to get higher and higher in this game. Like it's basically the same thing over and over and over. But there is an arbitrary path in front of you, and damn it, you're gonna get to the end. Like
I know why.
Yeah.
I know exactly what that. It's one of those things. It's there are tools in your game dev toolbox, and those tools are not inherently good or evil. It is how you choose to use them. And as far as I'm concerned, I like to think that we try and be as ethical as possible. That we try and give people good exit points out of our games. And that if we use any psychological tactics to make them more likely to keep playing or encourage them to keep playing, we do it in a way that's healthy. That we do it in a way that it's not, forever and ever with no exit point.
Right.
And it's easy, even if you don't have bad intent, it can be easy to overuse those tactics. Right. I think Civilization is a perfect example of this. I don't think anybody who makes Civilization has a malicious intent, and I think the just one more turn factor can be a pretty good thing. But that being said, they probably need to do a little more due diligence on adding some kind of solid exit point to their games, because it's one of those things. I mean, like I can play a Civilization game from start to end without like stopping and saving, and that's a lot of time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'm sure I didn't, that no one has sat down and just, had these kind of thoughts about, well, how do we keep players stuck in our game? They don't have to. Their game is that inherently.
It turns out, make a good game is the answer to that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they do have the ultimate Skinner box, as it were, in that, well, I'm going to get this cool thing next turn. And then after that, well, this other cool thing is going to happen next turn and next turn or 5 turns from now. And so and I've seen a lot of 4X games, just 4X games in general, have this problem. I had old Masters of Orion. The number of nights I stayed up playing Masters of Orion until the sun came up. And my exit point to that game was, oh, that's the sun.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I've done that with a few games. But
so, I mean, that's the thing is, even when you're not being malicious, you still have to try and keep that in mind, which I suppose that's entirely off topic of where we've been on deciding what to make. But I mean, at the same time, I suppose that the ethics of what you're making and how you consider things like exit points may play into that somewhat. I feel like we've been a little off topic for a lot of fun.
Yeah, I feel like there's still there's still value, like from what we've been talking about, as far as deciding what games to make, what we've been talking about, like, kind of it's okay. It's ethics is a big part of deciding what games to make, because you don't just want to rip off another game. You don't want to make a game that ruins the lives of your players by making them just like stuck in it forever. Like, you want your game to be fun and have replayability, but you don't want mothers emailing that, like, my son stayed up until 6 a.m. playing your game and he had a test the next day. Like,
I love Blizzard games, I really do, but like the number of term papers which have died on
oh my god, yeah,
WoW is probably a fair bit too much.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. I agree. There's a reason that World of Warcraft is one of my favorite games of all time, and I haven't played it for years because I can't go back. Our level designer for Intrusion Protocol, Josh, it's a running joke. I'll get on Blizzard chat, I'll log in, I'll do something, it'll just, hey, play WoW. I'll be like, no, I can't. I have a life. But yeah, but I do feel like, even if we were a bit off topic, like a lot of that does, factor into deciding what games to make, because you want to keep all that in mind, So going directly back on topic, at what point do you think we would want to make a 3D game? Because right now we are pretty focused on, we are in our 2D realm right now. We are focused on that. We're hammering it. We're getting better at it.
I think if we were to ever make a 3D game, it would be
Yeah, like what metrics?
it would be something. It would be either be a strategy game or some kind of something like a puzzle game where it's 3D but not 3D, and by that I mean like I really do like the mostly 2D aesthetic, just in general.
And it's so much easier to work with.
You know, I've seen a fair number of Unity games recently where they're like, we're have a 2D camera, but our game is built in 3D, and they look pretty sharp.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But the kind of investment in time, resources, skills to get people trained up to do that or hired to do that would be either we would have to see a fair bit of success to where our ambitions kind of grow and we're like, okay, we can really, really afford to take the time to do this. Or we would have to be looking at a market where we either do that or we can't make games anymore.
Right.
It's entirely possible that the market could shift, and it's no one will touch a 2D game at all. People talk about the indie apocalypse, and I give that various degrees of credibility. I think right now everybody's sales are garbage because there are a ton of things getting dumped on Steam all at once. But I really do, and I can't believe I'm saying this because I would not have said this a year ago. I really do believe Valve has figured out and is devoted to removing the bad actors from their ecosystem. Fully a third of the games released, I think last month, maybe it was the month before last, fully a third came from one company.
Oh, wow.
Realize that? Yes.
I did not realize that. Wow.
Well, they come from about 13 companies, which are all sock puppet accounts of this one developer. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, they're kind of like the asset flip kings at the moment.
That's insane.
Yeah. They're doing to an extent, aside from the fact that their base product are stuff available on the asset store, and they're just kind of releasing those, so they're doing the asset flipping. They're also going as far as to like change the background, and like this what would be the winter level in a normal game is its own game. It's the winter edition.
And the crappy thing, like, the crappiest thing about that is they are making money, like,
I'm not sure that they are. Here's the thing. Everyone's all like, well, Steam Direct has failed and that it's not gotten rid of the bad actors. Well,
I disagree that alone is a failure, by the way.
First off, I will say this, in that the bad actors are still releasing their first spat of games. The bad actors are sitting on money they've had from Greenlight and stuff, and the trading card ecosystem as it was, and haven't been given time to go out. They're gonna release some stuff before anything Steam does has a financial impact on it. Now, Steam probably does need to do more, but it looks like, cross my fingers, it looks like Steam's committed to doing that. We'll see if they do something with achievements. I'm hoping they don't bind them to the confidence metric. I'm hoping they do something more reasonable, like set an upper limit on the number of achievements you can have in a game. No game needs 10,000 achievements. So why let us put 10,000 achievements in a game? Like, that alone would hurt the asset flippers who are doing achievement farming, basically.
Right.
There are a few other things that I don't fully understand exactly how they're making their money, but like gray market sites in Russia and stuff with Steam keys. And I can't talk too much about this because some of this stuff is under NDA internally, despite the fact that there's been a leak of some of that stuff to the public. I'm not sure how much we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, Steam does seem to have noticed this stuff and is trying to do some stuff to rein in these bad actors a little bit. So
Right.
I think, yeah, everybody's having a bad time right now because the bad actors are really misbehaving right now. I mean, you can't have one company release a third of the games.
Yeah, that is bonkers, man.
Yeah.
But
I think that'll clear up a little bit. And if it doesn't, well, I mean, I don't know. My hope is that it doesn't get cleared up by the Steam Direct fee being ratcheted up to $1,000.
oh, please no.
I don't think it matters how high you make the Steam Direct fee.
Right.
I think
I think that would worsen the problem actually, because like these guys, like, even if they're not making a ton of money from each of these terrible games that they put on, they're still making money for them. They're going to make enough money to pay that fee, you know?
Yeah, that's kind of my thought, is like there's got to be, they need to go after the problems in the system that allow them to make money on games that real people aren't buying.
Right.
Instead of going after their ability to release those games. Or go after their ability to release those games, but don't do it with a fee increase. I mean, you can tell who the bad actors are when they're releasing this kind of volume. Just ban them.
Yeah.
I mean, ban the bad actors, which they've done some of that in the past, couple months. They've banned some developers who, let's just say, had adversarial relationships with their customers.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they, will start to consider making it so that Steam users can't find new games adversarial.
Yeah. And that's so to sum it up as far as how that relates to deciding what games to make is you have to consider, if you're making a game and you're choosing platforms, what is going on with platforms right now? Current events. Like, is this going to be good for you to release on this platform right now? Is there some trouble brewing? Like, selecting a platform.
Without going into too much detail, because we haven't announced the next project yet. Our next project is specifically designed to be developed quickly and at low monetary cost to the company.
Right.
Because we have this idea that almost anything you release on Steam right now at this moment is likely to have lower revenue than it would have 6 months or a year from now.
Right.
It would have had 6 months or a year ago. We really do think that, or hope at least, but I have some reasons to logically think this as well, that right now, this probably first year of Steam Direct is probably going to be the worst financially for developers.
Right.
And that it will get better.
So if we can make it through that, we can make it through anything.
I mean, either that or Steam won't take enough action and we'll just see a complete collapse of the indie market like we haven't seen since, Atari borked the entire industry in the late 80s.
Yeah. Well, we're going to assume that's not going to happen because that's really depressing.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's going to wrap up this episode. We talked about a lot of factors in deciding what games to make. We talked about, considering your resources, straight up what your interests are, what you're interested in making, probably the number one thing that people start with, profitability and market, longevity, visibility, and shareability, all important, ethics, and platform choices. So that's going to do it for this episode of the Dawn Dev Podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Chad Spangler, here with our head developer, John Grady, and we will see you next time.